Let's continue to work on the screensaver by looking at some more options we have in our code. And when I say options, I basically mean some things you can change to make it work for you or to make, experiment with different animations. So for instance, one thing that's been bothering me is the fact that when I draw my 800 by 600, which is kind of a classic computer resolution, but it's also kind of the wrong size for my screen, I always have to move this thing, and I've decided, that's starting to get annoying. So I thought, what if I took down my height to 500? Because everything I do is based on, height divided by 2, or if it gets greater than the height, and then it draws it at the height. I can make that one change, and I don't have to worry about it breaking my code. So now it's smaller and it fits on my screen down here. It doesn't go off the screen anymore. And maybe that'll make me happier because I don't have to worry about it, like moving it around all the time. Maybe I just needed to get used to hitting that expand button. But at the same time, I notice I have a little bit more room going this way than I used to have. So I thought, well, maybe I should increase my width by 900. So just making a little change, and again, it still fits on my screen nicely, and now I have a little bit more room left and right, so that's cool. So I have a different proportion size than I used to, and that might be nice to play with a little bit. Another thing that you can change, and this is kind of a big one that's kind of cool, is of course you can change the background. So down here earlier I said I have this command that I commented out, and I could put it back in there and I can change the background pretty quickly. So yay, dark blue. But more than that, what's interesting is that there's one that you wouldn't think of, and it's transparent. And what happens, obviously if I just play it you'll find out, but transparent is white. I'm still trying to move that. And unfortunately, I told it to draw a white circle, so that's not going to work out so well, right? So let's just try whatever other color comes to mind. And what transparent does is it does not redraw the screen every time. So instead of going to a black screen and drawing the circle, blank screen drawing the circle, this one just draws over top of what used to be there. And then you can start creating patterns. So as you play with this, the options here, you might find that that's cool. Now I'm still only moving at one at a time here, so maybe I want to speed it up a little bit. Maybe I want to shrink this down some, and then I could get something like this. And this is when things start to get a little mesmerizing. Now, what is it doing? Did it just disappear? No, because you can't see where it is. It was bouncing over top of where it already was. So right now it's going back over this. And so you can't really see it after a certain point, at least in the current setup I have. What if I didn't allow it to be rise over run being a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So it bounces more like this. Also, notice how you can see a little bit of the circle here. That's because if it's moving 10 at a time and my circle is whatever I made it 10 big, then it's kind of drawing the circle over top of itself, so you can see a little bit of the circle, which means, if my width was even smaller and I'm moving at, let's just say 5 and 8, then I should start being able to see the individual circles even better. So just some things you can play with. Now, if this was to, change more, then we could see even more cool effects. So here's the thing to realize, is that our draw circle right here is based entirely on variables. So far we've changed the x variable and the y variable, because those are the ones we use to move. What would happen if we changed the radius? So as soon as I say that, you can go and you can say, okay, well, I want the radius to change by 1 every time. And that would work, and it will get bigger. The problem is, of course, it will get bigger and bigger forever, and once it gets to the corner, it gets a little strange, but it is kind of fun. And so you think, well, what if it's not always getting bigger, but it's getting bigger and smaller? And that's where you set the same thing we have here. If we want to control direction, we need a variable that can change. So this CR needs to have a direction to it, right? Whenever you have that idea, you have to think to yourself, what variables do I have to add to the top? What variables do I have to add to my global command? and then what kind of code do I have to give it to actually do something. So this would still, now it will work. If I didn't add this, it would start giving me errors, but the variable exists. The variable is a global variable, and now I'm implementing the variable. Again, nothing will change. It'll do that same thing it did before. But now I can throw an if statement, just like I have with these, of how to change my direction. I'm saying all this kind of fast, but I am just saying, the variable the radius can work just like the x and the y. So let's just say if the radius gets less than 1, or the radius gets greater than, and then just pick a maximum number you want it to go, 30, then the CR direction equals the negative CR direction. Ooh, radius must be a positive number, so I said if it could get less than 1 it was okay, but if it gets less than 1 then it's going to get to 0, and that's going to be weird, so I'll say less than or equal to 1. And now it can change size, and so it gets kind of funkier things on the screen. Or you could even take that out, but I think I'll keep it. And then you can say, well, what about the width of the circle, which is only going to be different if there are two different colors on here. So first of all, let's change this one to color 2 and add a color 2 up here. So color 2 is going to be yellow. Yellow and purple look good together, right? And so I have to, of course, add color 2 to my list. You don't necessarily always have to add every single thing you do to the global, but for now we'll do that because it's a little easier to deal with if we just remember that we do that. So what's that do? Well, you can see that there's a 1 pixel width that then gets drawn in yellow. But what if it wasn't always 1 pixel? So what if CW was a value that could change? And then I think, oh, well, it's going to need the same things. It's going to need a direction that I can control. And it's going to need a place that it actually makes the change to it. And it's going to need an if statement. I'll do the exact same numbers for now for this one. I've never actually done this before. This was a new thing. I just thought, oh, I might as well make them all variables. The one thing I will say is I don't want the radius and the direction of this changing at the same time, because I think that would be boring. So I'm going to start the radius at 5, but I'm going to start it in the opposite direction. And then we'll see what we get. So maybe my thickness is too thick because now it hardly even shows the ball showing up, and it's almost all about the thickness. So maybe I only want my thickness to go, 1 through 5. So it never gets too large. And maybe I want my circle to be even further apart from where it is, so I'll add even more speed to my circle. Make it 10 and 10. No. 20 and 20. Really keep it away from itself. Yeah, ooh, that had some cool effects. I don't even understand what some of that's doing. Or it gets bouncing around the top like that. That's kind of funky. So all you would have to do at this point, if you think that this is kind of interesting, is start thinking about your own values. What are you going to put here? There's one more, and that's the color. So the color is a little bit different, because how do I make the color change? I can't change the name of a color, right? I can't add wood to this. Oh, excuse me. There we go again with the yawning. So that one I'm a little stuck with, the way that it's happening right now. What you have to know a little bit more is about color theory and another way that you can do this. So I'll be back with a tip about color, which can make things kind of fun. The last thing I want to say is, what if you didn't want to draw a circle at all, right? So what if we just change this whole thing? Now, if I'm going to do that, it's going to take kind of a lot of, right now it's going to take a lot of changing. Maybe I'll save that for another one as well. But, you don't have to use circles, because you could say, well, I want a line, right? So I want, instead of a single circle, well, let's just do this real quick because this will be kind of funny. Let's just say I want a line, and I want it, lines have 2 points. So they have an X and a Y, and then they have to know where to reach for the next X and Y. So what if I just always did the width divided by 2 and the height divided by 2? So the line was always reaching towards the middle. Now lines don't need a radius, so that's just right out. But they can use a thickness, and lines don't get 2 colors, they just get 1 color. So I can do something like that. So it's reaching for, one point is never moving, it's always here, and the other point is moving, and it's moving in this crazy way that we told it. So what's that do? It seems to have a hard time reaching the bottom. Oh, there it goes down there. So that's really kind of random and cool looking, right? Um, and then eventually it will probably fill up because, it never changes color. You could imagine you could add maybe another line that's white that's constantly kind of erasing or something, and so then eventually it would take away some and add some and that kind of thing. So that's another thing. You want to add a second ball. Well, you could do everything that you're doing here. You can add another one and just add 2's behind it. Make all of these have 2's behind them. Do a second draw circle. Getting rid of this again, of course, but another draw circle, and then have it do all these things twice, and then you have 2 bouncing balls, and then you say, well, now I want to do it 3 times. Once you get to a certain number, you're going to want to do it a different way, which would be either using lists, or to go even further, using object-oriented code, where the circle is an object that you can create multiple instances of. Right now we're not covering that, but if you did learn that in another badge, you could come back here and kind of apply that and see how that works. So that is some of your options in a nutshell. You could take what I've shown you here and do enough to do this badge, because this badge assignment, or this assignment I should say, this assignment is about creating your own screensaver, and as long as it's not something that I just did, so as long as it looks different than my circles or my lines right here, if you think of a few things you can do that make it unique, you can do that. I'm going to have a few more tips on some other options you have, including drawing images to the screen, and doing a few other things with like polygons. So check back if you want more about those things.